ما ودعك ربك وما قلى وللآخرة خير لك من الأولى এরশাদ হচ্ছে শপথ মধ্য দিবসের এবং নিস্তব্ধ রাতে আপনার প্রতিপালক আপনাকে ত্যাগ করেননি এবং আপনার প্রতি অসন্তুষ্টও হননি। ইহকালের চেয়ে নিশ্চয়ই আপনার জন্য পরকাল ভালো। اللهم ربنا ظلمنا انفسنا وان لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الابرار اللهم حافظنا من كل بلاء الدنيا ومصيبة الآخرة। হে আল্লাহ, করোনা মহামারীর এই প্রাদুর্ভাবকালে সারা পৃথিবীর মানুষ যখন ভীতসন্ত্রস্ত, এইরকম একটি সময় আমরা আপনার কাছে আশ্রয় প্রার্থনা করছি, আপনি আমাদেরকে আশ্রয় প্রদান করুন। হে আল্লাহ, করোনা ভাইরাসে আক্রান্ত হয়ে ইতিমধ্যে যারা মৃত্যুবরণ করেছে, আমরা তাদের রূহের মাগফিরাত কামনা করছি, আপনি তাদেরকে কবুল করুন। হে আল্লাহ, আপনি তাদেরকে ক্ষমা করুন। হে আল্লাহ, যারা আক্রান্ত আছে তাদেরকে আপনি সুস্থ করে দিন। হে আল্লাহ, ঢাকা চেম্বারের আগামী দিনের পথ চলা সহজ করে দেন। আমিন আমিন বিরহমাতিকা ইয়া আরহামার রাহিম।
Thank you, Mr. Janal Abedin. আমি শুরুতে আমি আমার মূল প্রবন্ধনে চলে যাব। বিসমিল্লাহির রহমানির রহিম। At the very inception, I would like to pay deep homage to the father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, in the year of the Mujib centenary and the 50 years of the glorious independence of Bangladesh. I thank the honorable discussants here today who are here despite their busy schedule. I think that it is worth mentioning that formulating the biannual economic state of Bangladesh has always been a part of DCCI's legacy. DCCI believes in an inclusive approach while declares economic priorities for private sector development. Despite having pandemic stress on various avenues of the economy, it took its course to revive the growth pace. The economy requires more concentration on revival and survival actions to overcome the pandemic implications, followed by agenda to thrive for transformation. And to continue this recovery momentum and thrive further, DCCI feels to share some critical macroeconomic agenda and the road to recovery for heralding private sector-led economic development. It needs to be noted that this biannual program is a continuation of the July to December 2020 biannual session and only focuses on various issues affecting macroeconomic environment of the country within the third and fourth quarters of fiscal year of 2020 and 2021. For some indicators of this study, a complete data of the fourth quarters of the fiscal 21 could not be used due to unavailability of data from various government and autonomous bodies. So please allow me to welcome you all to witness our presentation. The context basically highlights the COVID-19 impact, and then we talk about the Ldc graduation, performance of the monetary and fiscal policy, some macroeconomic factors, and then we have the agro sector, which is segregated from the other industry and the service sector, which is how the reporting is done according to the government. So we have maintained the same strategy. You have seen the economy at a glance. There has been a new change on the economic growth, which we were talking about earlier, as per the Bangladesh Bureau of Statistics, 5.47% reported, which is $355 billion. We have seen fair contribution to GDP growth in agriculture by 3.45%. Industry contribution is up by 6.12%. Service sector, 5.61%. As mentioned earlier, we have a stagnant inflation of 5.64%. Foreign exchange, of course, has seen a rise of $46.39 billion reserve right now. And standalone, the remittance itself is nearly $25 billion. Employment, as reported in 2020 by ILO and World Bank, is 5.3%, the unemployment rate. We have seen a 15.10% increase in goods exports, and of course, a 19.71% in import payments. And we have shared a comparison of the July, the last fiscal half yearly to the current of January to June 21. We have seen the data which has been shared to you earlier. primarily the rise in exports and imports, both of them, and remittance, of course, has gone up earlier in December 20, while it's shown a reduction of 8.5% in the second fiscal. The impact of COVID-19 economy, as discussed with you earlier, the value has been reduced to $355 billion as against a target of $374 billion with 6.1% growth. National poverty rose by 9% to 29.5% and 30% according to the BBS, and 2.26 million job loss reported. 68% of the working people in urban areas lost jobs according to the World Bank. And of course, new products like PPP, gloves and masks, these kind of export opportunity has shown new increase. Now we move on to the Ldc graduation and the impact on the economy. As you have heard earlier and has been recently much talked about, the preferential duty rates and the S&D treatment will see some erosions. The country is likely to lose $4 to $6 billion worth of exports following the graduation. Cash incentives and increased cost of exporters due to the removal of the incentives. TRIPS waiver is going to affect, the absence of it will affect the pharmaceutical products. Low-cost loans, ODAs, and grant facility won't be available in the future. And of course, the ISM will stop its existence. As for performance of the fiscal policy, NBR collected 220,000 crores, which is actually 16.93% higher than the last fiscal year. And as for the ADP, 58.36% was implemented compared to that of 57.37% of the corresponding period of fiscal 2020. As for the national budget recommendations, DCCI has made certain recommendations which increase the tax and the non-tax receipt net due to the reduced burden of the existing taxpayers, full automation of tax, VAT, customs assessment, return and credit. Sector-wise value addition needs to be determined, especially in the manufacturing sector. And through domestic borrowing target has been declined by 1.39% to 113,000 crores as per the budget speech. It exceeds target every year. So therefore, the government borrowings through savings certificate needs to be reduced. For the fast track and large development projects, we need to find a cost and time efficient implementation approach and rationalize the government expenditure, which also reduces substantially from the existing taxpayers. As for the performance of the monetary policy, which has just been announced very recently, the private sector is yet to be increased credit, despite the different policy measures of Bangladesh Bank, single-digit lending rate and excess liquidity. And to meet the soaring expenditure and deficit budget, public credit automatically increases, which creates a pressure on the private sector credit supply, the private sector credit supply. And the COVID-19 induced impact on business and economic atmosphere slowed the private sector credit. And of course, the lack of business confidence, which is much talked about, which shows to the declining trend of the credit growth. And lack of credit history, as well as manifold challenges from the supply side to stimulate CMSME credit, which has been in the news for quite some time, as you know, and also a definition of CMSME, which will be discussed in the further ahead in the slides. As for policy measures, you have seen an expansionary policy measure, and the private sector credit growth has been targeted at 14.8%. Bangladesh Bank has announced an expansionary policy aiming at pumping cheaper money into the economy for the post-pandemic recovery. The repo and the reverse repo rate, as you know, has been reduced to 4.75 and 4% respectively. As for the recommendations from DCCI, relaxed terms and conditions of repayment and collateral will need to help increase credit demand from the private sector. Innovative data cash transfers to MFS approach. This will also actually ensure the fullest implementation of the CMSME stimulus fund. Credit disbursement process of full bureaucratic tangles need to be eased. We talk about the red tapes all the time. Develop alternate credit scoring system using the common technology to stimulate CMSME credit. As you know, that the collateral-based model has not been as successful as opposed to a cash flow-based model, which would be in the future. For macroeconomic factors, we have recorded, the government has recorded 5.6% inflation, and the 6 months average is 5.37%. Non-food inflation was at 4.69%, which is actually increased to 5.94% in June 21. Food inflation was 5.23. That has also shown a rise to 5.45%. Price, especially rice, oil, essential commodities, due to frequent lockdown in Bangladesh, is rising significantly in line with the rising global trend. The government sets inflation target to 5.3% for the fiscal year of 2022. Rice, flour, and oil are actually sold at a substantially lower price under the OMS programs of the Food Ministry to contain the food inflation. As for recommendations from DCCI, the market-driven food inflation control needs to continue through strong market vigilance and monitoring fair price mechanism. Agriculture and agro-processing industry needs to be supported and remain functional with strong local supply chain to ensure food security amidst the economic crisis. International crude oil price shows an increasing trend in second and third quarter of 21. Alternative liquid fuel mix can be used to reduce the impact on non-food inflation. Private investment, the current state and challenges highlights that the private investment to GDP ratio rises to 23%. A net FDI inflow in Bangladesh has reached $1.4 billion during fiscal of July to April 21, whereas it was 1.11 billion of the same period in fiscal 20. Now, primarily the factors trimming the private sector growth, of course, the inadequate infrastructure, high cost of doing business. And again, we talked about the business confidence during the COVID impact. As for policy measures, you all know that the corporate tax has been reduced to 2.5% for listed and non-listed companies for the new budget. Bangladesh Bank obviously has liberalized the foreign exchange policies. 42 services of 12 government organizations are being provided in the current fiscal year, and it is targeted to provide 154 services of 35 organizations through one-stop service portal. Reforms are seen in profit repatriation of foreign investors and allowing international factoring companies to provide short-term financing to local exporters. That actually shows a small improvement in the ease of doing business, especially when it comes to FDI. And the private investment to GDP ratio has been targeted to 25% for the new fiscal year, and the private investment to in the 8th five-year plan, I think the target has been made to be 31.75% for the private investment to GDP ratio. And as for recommendations, improvement of the litigation system, ADR framework, it is very important. And as you know, the court automation, electronic payments, we have always been talking about. And for commercial disputes, I think it should be mandatory to have ADR to reduce the time, which also relates to the ease of doing business. As for getting electricity, enforcing contracts and resolving insolvency, getting credit, paying tax criteria in doing business index requires significant improvement. And of course, the country competitiveness ranking also needs improvement. Facilitating cluster development of backward and forward industries in special economic zones, a high-powered national committee, which we have also proposed earlier as well, that is needed to include chamber bodies for time-bound roadmap of pandemic recovery and investment improvement. And for long-term investment, we need to engage the capital market and introduce various products that takes the pressure off the banking system. International trade. As you see, the export of fiscal 21 has increased by 15.1% over fiscal 2020. And the import LCs during July-June of fiscal 21 increased to 19.71%, and which has shown an increase of $60.68 billion as opposed to $50.69 billion of July to June of fiscal 20. Capital machinery import recorded decline, but raw materials and other products are relatively well. Capital machinery, even though there has been new facilities in the new year's budget, but of course the business confidence is completely related. So new investments are still at a very slow pace. As for policy measures, the working capital loan of 32,600 crores nearly has been disbursed as of 30th April for industries. EDF has increased from $3.5 to $5 billion. The guidelines were framed for implementing programs on development of labor-intensive and export-oriented industries, diversification of agriculture, flourishing of the sector, development of the ICT-based entrepreneurship, and creation of overseas employment, which is also at a threat at this point of time. A joint study aimed at FTA with Sri Lanka and is at the final stage, and the SEPA of Bangladesh and India is currently in progress. And 38 products are getting export incentives on behalf of the policy measures, and Bangladesh Bank buys foreign currency from the market to stabilize our foreign exchange market and keeping Taka and USD exchange rate competitive. As for our recommendations, EDF and credit guarantee schemes need to be expanded. At the pace that Bangladesh is growing, we'll need further expansion. Diversification in terms of value, location, and sectors are needed. Trade diplomacy will need to be strengthened to eliminate the NTBs with the major trading partners. As for FTA and PTA with trading partners, and access to regional and economic trade blocks is also very important. And simplification of customs clearance and development of port systems and compliance capacity and focused country branding, where we can actually engage the MOFA, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to properly brand the country in the international arena. Now we move on to skills, which directly relates to employment as well. As you see, the graduate unemployment is 38.6%. We have the data up to 2019 from WAIDS. Reduction of employment in CMSME is around 62.4% just during the COVID-19 period. We had conducted a research on CMSME recovery, and we found that there is a perception about skills which varies a lot between the industry and the academia. We need to modernize our polytechnic education, and guidelines for freelancers are absolutely absent. 17% TVET enrollment, and declining trend in overseas employment, which is directly related to COVID-19. As for policy measures, the government has taken the Bangladesh National Qualifications Framework, which have been developed. Skills-based curriculum on CBLM are in the process of formulation. National Skills Development Policy is awaiting approval, and the National Skills Portal is already created. As for recommendations, we strengthen industry-academia collaboration to blend emerging industry skills and redesign the education curricula based on the market demand. DCCI has been actually working deeply on it, and many academicians as well as industry has been linked, associated, and supporting DCCI on this initiative. And to arrange internationally accredited vocational education for the low and the semi-skilled professionals, quality of standards of the vocational and polytechnic institutions are to be adequately improved. Semi-unskilled employment migration scheme needs to be increased for higher remittance earnings. And recently, skills requirement for employment creation and retention of CMSME. We have conducted a study for the post-pandemic industrial recovery, which shows that there is a cross-sectional mixed method reach, and randomly selected 102 respondents from the industry and academia to make it in time and cost efficient. 90% of the respondents believe that they need funds from the government. Excuse me, sorry. They need funds from the government for skill development programs of the employee. The employability is affected by both hard and soft skills. Most significant variables influence the employability that are teamwork, leadership quality, practical knowledge, dedication, and proficiency in commercial operations and digital skills. Apart from financial assistance, the businesses, they primarily seek, we have reached out in our study, they want training on international standards, they want free training, support in developing technical skills, and of course, training by vocational institutions. Now we move on to one of the backbone, which is one of the important sectors of the economy, which is the agriculture sector. As for the current state and challenges, you know that they contribute to 8% of the manufacturing sector. We are exporting to over 144 countries. And another interesting part is 70% of land is utilized with 40% of labor in rice production. And it hinders other crop production with limited productivity, a lack of backward linkage, quality control gap, and challenge in export diversification. The Ministry of Industries has drafted the agro-food processing industry policy for 2021. The government has also established the AFISC. Industries engaged in processing locally grown fruits and vegetables, producing dairy products, producing baby food entirely from locally grown agricultural products, and they will get tax exemption for 10 years. The Phytosanitary Institute established in Shampur, 9,500 crore has been allocated as subsidy in the agricultural sector for the fiscal 22, but this will not affect the state of the economy that we are highlighting right now because these came in the new budget. As for recommendations, quality control measures needs to be taken. Bonded warehouse facilities to expedite the export of processed foods. High-tech machinery and production equipment need to be introduced. Backward linkage needs to be developed for agro-processing. We need a separate food industrial zone to attract FDI and invest in post-harvest technology and cold chain storage facilities. Moving on to the industry. We first start with garments, the leading industry in the country. Bangladesh share, as you know, in the global apparel market has actually dropped to 6.3% in 2020, now having third position, while Vietnam recently gained 6.4%, ranking second position globally, according to the WTO. And the market value of Bangladesh was 28 billion in the year 2020, and we have limited preparedness for the 27 mandatory compliance of EU GSP Plus facility, which is going to affect us post the Ldc graduation, and then frequent price cuts by international buyers and retailers. As for policy measures, estimates apparel exports 35.1 billion in the fiscal of 22, preferential corporate tax 12% for RMG and 10% for the green RMGs. Additional export cash incentive is 1% in the next fiscal year, along with existing incentive. And 4% incentive will be provided on 30% value addition and above. As for recommendations, our policy support to create own apparel brands for branding Bangladesh in the global markets. We need to innovate, upgrade, and diversify for further export growth, and this considering the post-graduation market dynamics. To tackle the COVID-19 effects, stimulating the economy and employment, protecting workers through workplace safety are essential. More mechanization, industrial and labor and environmental compliance are required for the GSP Plus facility. Leather and leather products for the current state, we have seen an 18.06% growth in the fiscal of 21, which is almost $1 billion. The central effluent treatment plant in Savara is not fully functional, and the lack of the backward linkage industry are the current challenges. As for policy measures, the rawhide traders can reschedule their defaulted loans only after paying 2% down payments, reduce the duty of raw materials imported by the footwear industry. A stimulus package was declared as social safety net program for leather goods and footwear workers. Export guidelines in the leather sector is in the process of formulation. As for recommendations, ensuring the social compliance practice, expediting, modernizing, and establishing the CETP to get the leather working group certification to meet the ESQ practice benchmark. Exporters need to improve their negotiation power post the Ldc graduation time, where they will actually might end up in trouble. Rules of origin needs to be eased, central bonded warehouse facility is needed, and skills development needs to ensure cost-efficient and high-value production to be competitive in the regional market. Pharmaceuticals, the local market is about 3.5 billion, just about 1% of the GDP. And Bangladesh imports 97% of the required pharmaceutical raw materials. Our drug authority is not a member of the National Regulatory Authority of the WHO. We have seen delays in the implementation of the API part. 20% cash incentives as for policy measures for exporting API and 10% export for exporting finished formulation to unlock the potentials of the pharmaceutical products. It can be worth mentioning that the tax holiday for the API has been extended until 2032, and the National API and Laboratory Reagents Production and Export Policy has been formulated. As for recommendation, expediting the completion of the API park, a central bioequivalence and drug testing laboratory needs to be established. Excuse me. The drug authority must be and become an NRA, and we need to ensure the NRA status of the drug authority of the destination country to add vaccine to the export basket. Production costs must be reduced by implementing the API policy. Technology needs to be made quicker and effective through extensive investment and research in R&D by the government. Light engineering sector, they have seen some daylight in this pandemic actually. $1.6 billion annual turnover, almost 40,000 units are in function right now, but still using second generation technology. Exports have gone up by 81% in the fiscal of 21 to $529 million. Bicycle, its export has shown a 57% growth. We are still facing NTBs while entering into Chinese markets, specifically for bicycles. As for policy measures, 15% cash incentive for all the exporters of value-added light engineering products. As you know, it has been declared the light engineering product of the year for 2020. Tax exemption to the companies engaged in production of certain home and kitchen appliances, as well as light engineering products, has been declared for 10 years in the current fiscal year. The development policy of the light engineering industry is in process. As for recommendation, to enhance market access, the ECI rank needs to be improved. Of course, bonded warehouse facility is demanded. Low-cost fund and effective venture capital firms are required, and the price of land in the proposed industrial park in BSEIC should be rationalized, and industrial infrastructure needs to be adequately developed. Jute and jute goods. As for the current state, you see the export of fiscal 20 is 31.63% higher than that of fiscal 20. Many foreign investors do not actually have the idea about the jute sector due to traceable research in Bangladesh, and jute exporters, interestingly, does not get EDF, which undermines the export of jute products, which was once one of the remittance earners of Bangladesh. Policy measures for jute. The government is working to develop jute sector, increasing demand for jute at home and abroad as a natural and environment-friendly fiber. The government is implementing various research, innovative and promotional activities to diversify the jute usage. The rehabilitation of loss-making state-owned jute mills through PPP model is underway. And to sustain the growth of jute and jute products, the government is continuing to organize fairs of jute and jute products at home and abroad. As for recommendations, need to take the initiatives following the shortage of raw jute to keep the market stable. Production should be increased to keep price at bay, and we need to create a fund like the EDF where jute exporters can take soft loans from. We need to invest more in R&D for traceability of jute and its diversification. Now, moving on to the backbone of the economy, which is the CMSMEs. We have 7.8 million CMSMEs in Bangladesh, constituting over 97% of the industrial units. They actually account for 87% of the non-military employment and 45% of the manufacturing value addition. Major challenges are product diversification, skilled workforce, product quality, sourcing raw materials, access to market financing, and the need-based training for capacity building. As for policies, the ease of process for the credit guarantee scheme for CMSMEs taken by the government. Amendment was made in the stimulus package of working capital loan category. 2,500 crore of refinancing scheme was announced, and then 500 crore of startup fund. And then we saw in January 21, 2 new stimulus package where 2,700 crores was approved to boost the CMSME, targeting the low income and the poor people of the distant parts of the country. But it is worth mentioning that the national budget stated turnover of women and SME entrepreneurs, and they increased the turnover limit to 70 lakhs from the existing 50 lakhs, where they will be exempted from paying taxes. But this will take the effect in the coming fiscal year, and 1% exemption for the import of capital machinery to commercial and industrial SMEs. As for recommendation, the formation of the comprehensive policy framework and revisiting the definition of CMSME. We always say that the cottage, micro, small needs to be segregated from the medium, and medium can move on to along with the large enterprises. Collateral-free cash flow-based loans can be disbursed to ensure that the business can survive and thrive during this pandemic. The numbers are good, but they cannot provide collateral, so they need to be taken care of as well. And the loans must be disbursed within 7 days from the days of application, and formation of the national database of CMSMEs is also stressed. And then we move on to another study finding of DCCI, where we highlighted the challenges and way forward for CMSMEs to get low-cost financing. 150 samples were chosen randomly in DCCI, and of course within our members, and 8 divisional KIIs were chosen. Loan application status under stimulus package was really small due to lack of willingness and the structural policy. And again, the red tapes come in here as well. Primarily the bureaucratic complexities, and then the lack of collateral to be provided by the investors. To reduce the challenges of financing, as we mentioned, extending collateral-free loans, increase the moratorium period to 3 years. 1 year is not sufficient. Loan application processing time should be reduced to 7 days, and also the bureaucratic complexities, which we mentioned, needs to be reduced. Different financing choices as an alternative to bank loan, to trade discounting platform, followed by long-term equity financing through capital market as well as venture capitals. Microcredit, tech-based like MFS and fintech, extending loans without keeping account of daily transaction, track and debt from cooperative societies, respectively, are preferred for the informal sector financing. Unconditional government grants can be offered to ensure the survival of CMSMEs on the need basis. Moving to energy and power, inadequate power transmission and distribution in the network capacity. Yearly government subsidy is nearly 9,000 crores, 800 million standard cubic feet per day. LNG are imported to meet the supply gap, and inadequate gas separation in both the on and offshore blocks due to the limited capacity of the state-owned enterprises. As for policy measures, 108 gas wells are planned to be repaired and worked. In the ADP, 12.1% has been allocated for the sector to enhance energy security. The government has increased fuel oil reserve to about 13.2 million metric tons. LPG cylinder and auto gas tariff has been fixed by the BERC, and 1,000 million standard cubic feet per day LNG will be imported by 2021, and thereafter 2,000 million by 2025, constructing land and FSRU terminals through build, own, operate, and transfer. As for recommendation, a stable and primary energy fuel sourcing mix and pricing policy is needed. Local exploration companies are to be enlisted in capital market for financing quick exploration of the blocks. IOCs can be allowed to form JVs with local companies to expedite exploration. All the PPAs need revision. No production, no payment strategy, and the local currency payment can be allowed to reduce the pressure on the current account. Private investment can be encouraged in power distribution and transmission operation, as you have seen the success stories in India, where the power transmission and distribution is under the private sector. LPG bottling and storage facilities needs to be installed through PPP models, considering the rising domestic and industrial demands. Moving on to the service sector. To begin with banking and insurance, growing uncertainty has decreased the demand for credit in the private sector, as we mentioned in the start of our event. Overall, NPL in banking sector went up to 8.5% nearly in March. Loan disbursement of the stimulus remained at 75%. Disbursement of industrial term loan from October to December of fiscal 21 decreased by 31.84%. And CMSME loan increased by 0.68%, which saw a very brief rise. The CRAR went up to 11.67% at the end of March 21, which is also, again, a slight improvement in capitalization within the banking sector. Actually, the foreign banks are performing ahead of the other banks. As for policy measures, the central bank's purchase of 7.6 billion from the banking system helps the export sector in the dollars they have purchased, and the loan moratorium period and categorization of default were extended until 30th August this year. Only if 20% that remains due by June. IDRA, the Insurance Development and Regulatory Authority, introduced the digital e-receipt. Advance to deposit ratio has been increased by 2% to allow banks to lend more. Insurance Act 2010, when relevant rules should be implemented for third-party brokerage firms, giving due commission for valued service to develop fair insurance culture. Agricultural livestock insurance for our areas were introduced. A feasibility of introducing microinsurance for empowerment of poor women is in progress. Recommendations. Cash flow-based lending must be initiated instead of collateral-based. This keeps coming up, I know, but it is a very strong recommendation. Considering the second wave of the onslaught of COVID-19, the moratorium period needs to be extended, as we said earlier, at least to 3 years. Loan at a subsidized rate, like the stimulus package, can be increased, and to remove the red tapes on loan disbursement and disbursement of loan within 7 days of the application. A national database of CMSME and the redefinition of CMSME, which I have highlighted, for easier and larger access to finance. Moving to the capital market, of course, some daylight we have seen in this sector in the recent past. We have performed better than India and China in the recent months, but no trading of treasury securities in DAC and CSE. Very low SME participation and lack of full automation at every level of the security transactions. You've seen the comparative chart in the graphs figures given on your right. Now, moving on to the policy measures. DAC has planned to launch export products, new products like convertibles, bonds. Sukuk is already in the market, index and ETFs and VNEX, etc. And partially, some of them are already executed, just as I mentioned. Upper limit for paying dividends of banks is increased to 35% and 15% for NBFIs. Central Bank and BSEC motivates banks to invest 200 crore as special fund in the capital market. They also removed the floor price for listed companies. The decision to expedite listing and trading BSEC approved perpetual bonds, which are issued as through banks as Tier 1 capital, which is also a positive move. And Bangladesh Bank also stressed sustainability of improving liquidity conditions and boosting investors' confidence in capital market through expansion of the investors' base. As for recommendations, allowing stock buybacks for all companies as an alternative to dividends to the investors. That way the shareholders can also, the sponsors can also have their say. Allowing short sale of securities, again, that does create a threat in the market, but again, that needs to be addressed. Awareness campaign must be launched by different stock exchanges to motivate firms to issue securities at the stock exchanges for financing long-term projects. The government and municipal authorities, as mentioned, the city corporation, roads and highways can issue bonds for like infrastructure bonds to fund their development projects. Rules need to be relaxed to attract SMEs to capital market in the view of the ongoing pandemic. The current state on challenges, I am going to rush through quickly. It takes a turnaround time of 3 days in Chattogram Port, mostly single track and diesel locomotives in railways. Inland waterways, very poor navigation of the waterways. We need to transfer our road transport to the water transport. And then uncertain traffic reduces average speed to 30 kilometers an hour, increasing the logistics costs. As for policy measures, you can see we have highlighted. I'm sorry to briefly interrupt and just notice the Honorable Chief Guest who has joined us. Sir, I'm almost at the finish of the presentation, and then we will come back to you. I know you're extremely busy, but I'm humbled that you have joined us despite your extremely busy schedule. So moving on, the government policy measures. Implementing upgrading of 1,140 kilometers, important regional highway under the RSTP, which is almost a 20-year plan. The communication infrastructure budget has been increased by 21%. The capital dredging and other activities increase navigability along the 53 riverine routes of Bangladesh. And to enhance operational efficiency of ports, plans were taken to conduct container terminal, overflow yards, bay terminal, bulk terminal, and procure vessels as well. As for recommendations, strengthen governance, change the method of road construction, which is the highest in the world right now, need to develop an inclusive and long-term logistics strategy, allocate resources for communication infrastructure maintenance, automation needs to be brought into the port management. Moishkali Matawari Deep Sea project needs to be developed soon for faster trade. Moving on to real estate, unplanned development, as you know, high-rise buildings without environmental compliance and zonal planning and building codes. Approximately the turnover per year is roughly 280 billion taka. Approval from the 11 to 12 organizations are required for new project approval. This industry has also encountered drastic shifts in demand since the pandemic has started. As for policy measures, the government has taken up a comprehensive plan to ensure well-planned urbanization and sustainable housing for all, to modernize megacities and ensure planned growth. Master plans are being prepared to solve the housing problem in Dhaka metropolitan area. 60,000 new residential flats in Purbachal and 8,400 flats in Uttara Sector 18 are being developed as we speak. As for recommendations, to initiate a holistic and comprehensive real estate brokerage, which happens in the Western world and seems to be a very successful solution model. Legal and strategic issues for real estate investment must be addressed and to provide one-stop service for the real estate developers. ICT, corporate tax holidays were declared in 2024 for FDI, which is yet to be implemented. NBR is fully unaware, we can say, because we recently engaged in a dialogue and we both with NBR and the ICT, where they're unaware of the IT and ITS service export nature. The sector lacks proper IP valuation guidelines, and Data Security Act and data privacy laws are absent, the effect of which I'll share in my next slide. Further expansion for the exemption time of the existing 22 ITS companies enjoying tax exemption in this budget. These are the policy measures, and then 5,000 skilled people have already been providing training on. By providing training on 4,000 IT courses, A2I Bangladesh has provided telemedicine services to more than 27,000 civilians by engaging 590 doctors using 27 telemedicine service providing agencies. As for our recommendation, tax exemption provided by the ICT sector needs to be expanded to take Digital Bangladesh vision one step forward. The Data Security Act needs to be updated to attract the foreign buyers. The 24 high-tech parks need to be fully operational ASAP, and the employees must be trained in line with the requirements of 4IR technology. And the corporate tax holiday for FDI needs to be ensured and extended until 2030. This will also affect the Ldc graduation. The country branding through foreign missions are also stressed. Health sector. We are still stuck with one hospital bed for nearly 1,200 individuals, and population per registered physician, as you can see, is nearly 1,500. The number of doctors under the DGHS per 10,000 population is 1.55. Inadequate infrastructure with both rural and urban areas, and multifaceted challenges, which we'll highlight in the policy. The government has pledged to ensure standard healthcare facilities at affordable cost. In the national budget of 22, if you notice, the tax exemption has been offered 10 years to provide standard healthcare services beyond Dhaka, Narayanganj, Ghazipur, and Chittagong. So anybody investing in new hospitals or healthcare systems. And also in the new budget, the ADP of the health sector allocation is 130 billion taka for the fiscal year of 22, increased by almost more than 8.5%. And as you can see, the adolescent family health corners were opened in the Union Health, as well as the maternal and child welfare centers. The Integrated Health Science Research Development Fund of 100 crores were allocated for organization, and 100 billion is set aside to meet the COVID-19 outbreak. As for recommendations, special focus given on investment in the governance of the health system, community-centric healthcare services, R&D of public health is much stressed. And then well-organized regulation need to be formulated to monitor the private sector healthcare service. The government can set up training centers in joint venture with Philippines, Thailand, and other countries who have shown success in these regions. As for social safety net, the average allocation is about 4% of the GDP, whereas in Bangladesh it's only 3%. The National Social Security Strategy is still not implemented, which challenges the identification of the beneficiary, which I must say we are seeing the results during the COVID-19, the distribution of these stimulus. And low tax GDP ratio constrains the expansion of the program, which creates existing pressure on the existing taxpayers. The government provides accommodation facilities, which I must mention, to 66,100 89 homeless families alongside rehabilitating 3,715 others in the Mujib centenary year through the Ashrayan projects. Now, we are beyond that allocation of total over 1 lakh crore in the social safety net in the new budget. 92.2 crores was allocated to protect all disadvantaged children, and then the allowance for widow, old age, and freedom fighters have also been increased. As for recommendation, we can introduce universal healthcare scheme and pension scheme, proper database of vulnerable groups, and innovative methods to distribute cash using ID numbers and mobile wallet apps to ensure transparency and accountability. But for that, we also need to train the users behind it. Implementation of the National Social Security Strategy and proper database of the vulnerable group, which is very important right now. Informal sector, as you know, 42% of Bangladesh's GDP, and this sector has estimated to have lost 6.7% of its pre-COVID workforce. There's no database of the sector to identify people engaged in, and informal sector accounts for 85% of the total employment. Now, as for policy, they have expanded the coverage, which we have seen in the social safety net programs to protect the extreme poor and the low-paid workers. 95,500 crores worth of social security was offered in the fiscal 21 through 119 social protection programs. It was 3.1% of the GDP and 16.8% of the budget. But we must also appreciate that the government has announced 5 new stimulus package of 3,200 crores for the low-income people that were affected severely by the countrywide restrictions. As for recommendations, government needs to create a flexible regulation to bring informal sector into the mainstream so they can be traced easily. The need to publish a list of beneficiaries of unions, polo shavas, and city corporations and websites to make sure the benefits go to the right groups of people. And restoring disruptions in the food supply chain and strengthen market linkage for producers and benefit informal workers. And grants can be extended to informal sector to revive their businesses. I have come to the end of my presentation. So first of all, I would sincerely like to thank you for your patient hearing, and from our assessment of the macroeconomic perspective over the last 6 months, we found our economy is being conducted more or less in the right direction despite manifold COVID-led challenges. But there are some rooms for further private sector oriented economic development, which we tried to bring to the attention of the government today. And also before, but we believe both public and private sector can both go hand in hand in the days to come, and together work together towards the road to recovery to achieve the game-changing economic transformation that Bangladesh has targeted in 2026 and then also in 2041. At this point of time, I thank you all. And as you know, that the Honorable Minister has been patiently waiting while in the middle of another meeting. So he needs to be excused to go back to national duty. So before I move on to the discussions, I would humbly request, and first of all, again, let me once again thank you, sir, for joining us and showing us that this is how your support for the private sector. And as I just mentioned, we work hand in hand together. So, sir, we would like to seek your guidance. And interestingly, while I was making my presentation, you joined right exactly when the Planning Ministry's presentation and the achievements were discussed. So I'm glad you saw it. And, sir, over to you. The floor is yours. Can we unmute, sir? আপনাকে unmute করতে হবে.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I think I'm hard now. Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Rizwan, thank you very much. I just came in and heard the tail end of a very forceful presentation. The last bits that I heard was very effective and I thought very focused and very forcefully delivered. You're a young man compared to me, much younger than I am, and you represent the new generation of business leaders in this country on whom we want to lay stress on their abilities and their capacities. And we in the government at this moment, particularly our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, she does put a lot of importance to the rising young generation of business people in this country. So from that perspective, I would like to thank you that you had this TCCI, one of our venerable business organizations, and you have organized this seminar today on biannual economic state and future stance of Bangladesh economy. Very difficult subject for me personally, but you have a lot of experts here. I can see the names, I can see some of the faces. They deal in these things all the time, and I'm sure you will have very effective and very meaningful discussions which will take us forward. I also see Professor Dr. Mohammad Farashuddin is a guest here. And of course, I see Dr. Binak, our man in the BIDS, Nazin, who was with us only recently, but now she's gone over to UNDP. So three of our own very, very close colleagues are here. So the point that I would like to say that on the main subject, I won't have much to say because I'm not trained in that subject. But I feel, having worked with the Prime Minister for the last 10 years, I have somehow, through the osmotic process, learned something about the movement in the economy. I can't say I know the whole of it. There's no denying that you are the dominant factor, you in the private sector now. 70%, 80%, 90%, makes very little difference. You are the dominant factor. You are in the driving seat. And you've been there for some years now, for the last 20, 25, 30 years. The last 10 years, 12 years that we have been with you, the present Prime Minister and us, has been the most productive of the relationship between you and us in terms of net worth to the addition to the economy as a whole, in terms of what we call Probid in Bangla, which means growth, in terms of change in living conditions in the country, in terms of moving more people out of poverty onto above poverty line, but still not adequate, I would say. We have more to go. So in all these major factors, our collaboration with our private sector has been beneficial overall. And I see no reason to change the sort of course at this midstream now. We are at a stage of, we have taken off, I think. We're at a stage of now reaching a higher cruising level, which will be sustainable, which will take us further, and which will take us to our destination. So as far as I can see from myself, from our Prime Minister, I don't see any imminent change in the direction from our side. And from your side, there's no question because you're already dominant here. So I think it's going to be a win-win for you and for us also. Only thing that I would like to emphasize here in this very warm and very productive relationship is that we obey the rules of the game. Rules apply to you, rules apply to us also. And the highest rule that we have is our constitution, Songvidhan, that provides all the rules and regulations for all of us in this country, private, public, semi-private, wherever. So under that, we have a plethora of other rules and regulations also. And under that, we have certain political goals also, which are very pronounced and which are very clear. What are those? You know very well, you are also equally conscious citizens. Sustain the level so that the game-changing scenario that has appeared in our economic landscape is sustained and is pushed forward with the aim to improve the living conditions for all of us, but particularly at the lower level. In other words, taking more people out of poverty, improving their living conditions. That's number one. Number two, we would like to see that the welfare of the working class, the people who make physical contribution physically in your activities, in our activities, here within the country or even abroad, a few millions, physical contributions in addition to your capital and to the machineries and to the equipments, the bare last limit physical contributions who make their welfare, their safety, their compensation, just compensation, which are known to all of you here. It's nothing secret. So their just contribution is ensured, and they are provided a lifeline which is secure, or which is legally correct, and which is morally also defensible anywhere. We want to move this country not only economically, we want to move it in terms of other values of life. More democracy, more freedom, more room for all citizens, and the goals of our forefathers, goals of our colonized forefathers for over 1,000 years, to reach this level of independence and to keep it intact and to remain fully and wholly independent, under no obligation to no one except to our own citizens. So within that bounds of those big laws, the daily work that you do and we do are governed by only those. So I would like to once again bring this to your kind notice, that this is remembered by our private sector, by a very important private sector, by a very, very, very forceful private sector in all their activities. Now, there are other policy matters which you have mentioned yourself in your presentation: tax holidays, tax exemptions, the fiscal measures, financial measures. These things can be addressed on a day-to-day basis. We are always in dialogue with you. We see in the newspapers that this perhaps is the government which has been the most business-friendly until now in this country. We take it as a matter of sort of pride for us that we are trusted by our private sector. I can assure you today in this very August gathering that this will continue, and we will probably, this present threat to our economy that comes out from COVID situation, hopefully we think we will be able to overcome that also, like we have overcome other difficulties in the past. At this moment, we're in the final stage of vaccine push. If we can maintain it and achieve that 70-80% golden line, hopefully by end of this year, we'll be out of the mess altogether. And once, this is my personal opinion, once we come to a level where death figures come below 50, that's my assessment, I'm not an expert, just sort of common sense, I think we would open up everything and go back things on to our earlier position. So let's work together to achieve that level, and to to see that your turf is kept secure, and you can operate and you can practice your businesses, whatever, manufacture or other areas, or banking, finances, exports, whatever, smoothly and without any fear or without any uncertainty. That's the biggest fear in life. So this uncertainty will have to be reduced to the largest possible extent that we can. Government would like to assure you that, and I would like to assure you that on behalf of the government, that I in the planning ministry and my colleagues here, whatever we have to contribute, we'll always do our best so that your and our national interest is served. Having said that, I must apologize to all of you once again that I have a very important meeting organized by Cabinet Division and my ministry next door. Almost all secretaries are here, senior secretaries. So I think I have to go and join them again, and I'll miss your company because I enjoy being with you. I don't know, I can't explain that, but of course I enjoy being with you, but I have to go. But before I go, I can hang on for another 10-20 minutes so that the moving out is smoother and more civilized and better. So from that point of view, I thank you once again and for this invitation. I've been in the past many times. I've been to your very important meeting in the past when Nihad and A.K. Khan and other people had been heading this organization. So once again, thank you very much for your invitation. Good luck. Thanks to everyone. Jai Bangla. Jai Bangabandhu.
Thank you very much, sir, for your trust and confidence in the private sector. And at the same time, before we move on to our discussions, I would, in presence of everyone, I humbly and strongly apologize to Dr. Muhammad Farashuddin for the gap of the communication. Sir, we have been constantly sending emails to the wrong email address of the East-West University, and we did not send it to your personal email. That's why there has been a slight delay. So as I was saying, we just wrapped up the presentation, which has also been sent to email. I hope you have time to go through it, Dr. Faraz, sir. And in the meantime, we will move on to our panelists, and that will also help the Honorable Dr. Farashuddin to summarize the discussions and which is going to highlight the biannual economic state and the future stance of the Bangladesh economy. Sir, again, thank you. This also goes to show that because of a complete mess up by DCCI, but still yet our guest of honor has joined us without knowing that his event was today. And that goes to show how the public sector has always blessed us and trusted us. Even when we fall along the line, we make mistakes, they are there to show us the right way. Thank you, sir, for your kind words, the Honorable Chief Guest, and of course, the guest of honor for joining us. If you allow, I would like to move on to call upon Professor Mohammad Abdul Muman. He is the director of IBA, not only a renowned professor, but also representing the country's top business and also in the field of garments. And I would like to request him to share his insights about the financial sector, RMG, and other export-oriented manufacturing sectors and their future outlook in Bangladesh. And of course, you're allowed to touch upon any part of the presentation if you wish to do so. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much. It was actually a total delight and pleasure to be here with in such an august gathering and be able to speak something on this, I would say, marvelous presentation that I have just seen. And not only the presenter, but also the performance of the country that we have been doing in all the sectors. You know, I would like to congratulate all the members of the government, of the Honorable Prime Minister, and also the sectors involved in this, you know, even during this pandemic, the way we have been moving on and the way we have been keeping our economy up and running and almost robust. So you have covered a whole leg, you know, sir, in your presentation. And I thought it's not my cup of tea to cover everything that you have said, but I've just touched upon a few things. As you mentioned, would be export, the other one would be COVID recovery, and I would like to touch upon a little bit on skills development. So I see the Ldc graduation as a threat to the export sector. As you have already mentioned, I come from an entrepreneurial family, and we are into manufacturing and export. So I see the threat coming. At the same time, you know, if you look at the other countries who have been very successful in you know, diversifying the export products, the amount of FTAs that they are now having. So with FTAs, what is happening is also we might look at there are two sides to it. You know, we are going to give them a privilege also by allowing our economy to them, you know, duty free. But we also open up for in foreign investment, which is, you know, very much possible. This is I think a sort of an incentive for investors to look at a market, the potential of a country to invest in when the country has got certain, you know, free trade arrangement with certain countries. Although in most part in Bangladesh, we have seen our export-oriented entrepreneurs are mostly Bangladeshi entrepreneurs. Locally homegrown companies have, you know, excelled over the years in exporting. That too, I think this entrepreneurial skill will be diversified into other products and other sectors when we have this. So I would encourage our government to, you know, engage more into the, you know, free trade arrangement that we can have the post the you know, I would say Ldc graduation. And also, of course, the GSP plus facilities. You mentioned the 27 aspects that we need to look at. So those needs to be emphasized. Also, how we can, you know, proceed towards having those and you know, engage with governments and authorities to do that. Regarding COVID recovery, I think the Honorable Minister has mentioned that, you know, the comprehensive vaccination and the achieving the golden line. We surely do that. I think we'll be. I mean, after we achieve that, I'm sure our economy will be back in full force, and we'll be, you know, in a position to not only recover, but also, gain in each and every front and each and every sectors. Regarding, export, I would like to mention one other thing. You see, so far we have been working as a B2B manufacturer, and also sort of original equipment manufacturers. We don't have our branding, but there are countries, since countries like Japan, Korea, even Taiwan. These countries, they have established from day one. They have established their own branding, in products. They have got huge. They have sold the products, both electronics, cars, etc., in their own name. Textile has been our, export, majority of the export basket. It was difficult to create branding there then, but I think with digitized economy, with more and more online presence, it is all the more. You don't have to have brick and mortar shop. You can create online presence. So if you can facilitate that, I think that would be a remarkable, improvement towards, the price decline that we always have in terms of, export products. The other thing is we have to, in whatever sector we do, wherever we are working, we have to improve the made in Bangladesh tagline. The made in Bangladesh should gain more and more, brand value over the years. For example, when our Kishore of Bangladeshi wins up, or participates in Australian, MasterChef competition, and a sort of showcase our Panta Ilish. That is a branding, which is not being, fully capitalized. When our team wins in 3 consecutive matches, that's a branding. So each and every space wherever we are working, there has to be. And I think with digital space, right now with so many, youngsters working in the digital space, where, where there is a scope for introducing Bangladesh as a sort of innovative country, as a knowledge-based country, which is where in the overall made in Bangladesh branding it can improve. You see, and we can also look at some other non-traditional kind of skills export. For example, if you look at Philippines, go to any international hotel, you'd find a brand which is a Filipino band playing, Michael Jackson or some other. So why can't we create this kind of non-traditional, export skills of export? We can have caregivers, you can have, nurses. Regarding knowledge, I think more we have to, create an environment where we can have a collaboration, more collaboration with not only local industry and academia, but also with foreign, I would say, research organizations, foreign universities. I'll give you an example. If AstraZeneca and Oxford can create a vaccine in 6 months, why can't that sort of a collaboration take place in our universities, in our, both beyond and within and beyond in the country? So I think these are the areas, if we look at, then we can improve and we can convert the country and the branding as a knowledge-based, innovative, country over this current state of low tech, low wages, mass product manufacturing country. This is a betterment than a bottomless basket, but it should be enhanced more by way of introducing these sort of things in this change environment of digitization, in this change environment of 4th IR, and with that, and to take advantage of the I would say our population dividend. So all of these things, I think our policymakers and also, as us in education institutions should look at to engage more going forward, so that we have a total transformation of the country's image in this direction, and that will probably lead us in the next centuries as a more vibrant, knowledge-based country over this, the current kind of tagline that we have. Made in Bangladesh should ring a bell like made in Germany or made in United States, this kind of a bell, it must ring in our mind. That is what we should look at, and that is what we should go forward to. With these few words and giving me this opportunity, thank you all for having the opportunity to listen to me. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mohammad, for your valued remarks. What actually I wanted to highlight was you mentioned these successful stories of the Philippines on skills and how they are making their earnings remittance, which is actually 10 times higher than Bangladesh, with 1/10 of the workforce, because the average earnings is much, much higher. And then, of course, the importance of academia and industry. If Oxford and AstraZeneca doesn't prove the importance of industry and academia, then we don't know what is more important, because this is currently saving industry and academia right now is saving the world. And another one is using the right brand ambassador also. Like you just mentioned, why don't we engage Kishwa Chaudhary to brand Bangladesh in Australia? Everybody knows her now. We engage the right person in America, Bangladeshi, who's popular. We have so many out there. Engaging them alongside our embassies, alongside our business communities. Whatever reaches out, we can engage Mashrafi, we can engage Shakib Al Hassan, whatever sells. The right approach. Thank you very much for your kind words and valued suggestions, which we will definitely create an outcome report for the information of the government. Thank you for being with us. And at this point of time, let me bring in an emerging and a dynamic economist of the country with having more than 2 decades of research experience. Dr. Nazin Ahmed is currently the country economist of UNDP and also worked as a senior research fellow in BIDS. And my question to Dr. Nazin would be, if you could tell us how the government and the central bank can balance the issue of excessive liquidity at the banking sector and making sure that sufficient liquidity remains in the economy to foster growth recovery and recover inflationary pressure and manage the budget deficit prudently. And again, of course, you're allowed to touch anything else from the presentation you've heard. Over to you, Dr. Nazin.
Thank you very much. Thanks to DCCI for inviting me to this very important webinar. And it was a wonderful presentation, Rizwan Bhai. And I'm very glad to see Dr. Farashuddin to be here, and also my DG, Dr. Binayak Sen, and of course, I'm happy to see all others. Before I answer to your question, I want to emphasize what Professor Mohammad just mentioned in his remarks. I think those are very important points that we don't usually talk about, but I think we can talk more on these issues maybe in another webinar or in some places. You have mentioned about how I think when we talk about this excess liquidity management at the moment, it's very much linked to your whole presentation, how the economy is performing. It's not only just Bangladesh Bank and government decides on something and some miracle will happen. What the presentation that you made, if we just see the whole presentation and try to summarize what are we dealing with in next 2 to 4 years, I think there are 2 issues. One is COVID recovery and the other one is Ldc graduation. So everything that you said, we are working on to having these 2 main objectives. And your question actually relates to this whole paradigm, that what is our plan regarding this COVID recovery and how we are planning for Ldc graduation. And there comes how we deal with the banking sector, other supportive measures, e-commerce, financial inclusion, all those things. So I think regarding COVID recovery, when you gave recommendations from different sectoral aspect, but I think it's very important we all understand that this is related to the whole issue of addressing the COVID itself at this moment, the vaccination and how we accelerate vaccination, how we reduce the wastage that we saw in other, how inequality. We want to ensure it for all people as soon as possible. So that will create the economic environment where we can think normally, where we can plan normally. So it's very important how we deal with the whole vaccination issue. And until we can vaccinate the reasonable proportion of population, we have to plan for how we can keep our this whole distance maintaining, masking, awareness raising regarding that. We have to continue with that. We know that lockdown, even if it's the first best solution, we cannot continue it for as lockdown really means. So in that case, it's very important to keep the economy going in, and until we are vaccinated, we can vaccinate a good proportion of population, we should be very strict about other measures so that the risk is lower. And regarding this liquidity management, I think it's very important how we can make access to finance easy for the MSME that you mentioned, because this is very important. They need this the most. But I think when we are we see the measures in terms of COVID recovery, somehow it's skewed towards more, who are like the large industries, so in some cases, relatively lower affected people, because everyone in the same sector are not affected in the same way. So I think when we are thinking of liquidity management, it's very much related to how we can make finance accessible to the small and micro and small industries. It's very important. And there, I think the policies regarding financial inclusion is very important, because we see lots of huge gender gap in financial inclusion. And this is actually hampering the women entrepreneurs at this moment. Relatively very small, micro level women entrepreneurs that we see in the grassroots level who are doing business. So for them, it's even difficult to access finance. And there, I think, which was not discussed in your presentation, is the role of e-commerce. And there, I think there is a huge inequality in e-commerce platform regarding the marginalized people and those who are in the front line. Even within women entrepreneurs, we see those who are, literate, financially literate, who knows how to use e-commerce platform. They are in a relatively better position to maintain their business, even to go for accessing finance. But many micro level entrepreneurs in the rural areas, they cannot do that. They cannot utilize the e-commerce platform. I think when we are talking about excess liquidity, it's both the supply side and demand side problem. Many business, as you rightly mentioned, that they don't have the confidence that they want the working capital. They can take the loan because it's a working capital loan, especially the stimulus package. So many of them are not confident about their business. So I think it's very important how we work about financial inclusion. It's very important how we make the e-commerce work at the moment. It's very important how we do our overall vaccination and COVID risk mitigation program. And I will just touch upon one issue, 30 seconds, that is Ldc graduation. There are lots of issues there, but I think it's very important also because it's 2026 that when we are planned to graduate. So during this time, we will be recovering from COVID, and also we have to take preparation. And in the preparation, I think we already have a committee there, a very high level committee working on the Ldc graduation. But I think it's very important how public-private partnership happens there. And also it's very important how the whole nexus of government's planning and development partners can work together. And some of the areas that you mentioned here, those are very rightly mentioned, but I think it's also very important to improve our negotiation skills, to survive well in the post-LDC world. And this negotiation not only refer to trade negotiation, it's the financial negotiation, that's its debt negotiation, negotiation in terms of intellectual property rights, obviously trade negotiation, and very importantly, climate negotiation. So we have to build our expertise on that. We have to remember that in the post-COVID world, green investment, green trade, those are very important. So if we want to survive, then we all have to plan. We have to start planning from now. And there also Bangladesh Bank and the government, the whole banking sector has a role to play, how they finance the green initiatives, the green investment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Nazin. Let me just revisit some of the things you said. Ensuring vaccination, this is now not only a public demand, it is a demand for all. If we are going to open the economy eventually as a whole, the country needs to be vaccinated. We are seeing the stories of how the economy has opened up in China, in USA. They are doing mass vaccination rollout. Yes, so definitely. And you touched on access to finance of MSMEs, not only large industries, absolutely, because the large industries seem to be benefited. Again, if you're talking about why the large industries are getting it, it's purely the bank-client relationship when it comes to large industrialists or some medium entrepreneurs as well. Gender gap in financing needs to be reduced, as you rightly mentioned. Of course, these women are being left behind. But yes, again, the government has taken some very minimal policy measures to ensure to address that gap, and also encouraging the women to come into the tax net as well by increasing the untaxed revenue up to 70 lakhs in the new fiscal year. And of course, the role of e-commerce, which is much talked about in the recent days, how people should gain their confidence on e-commerce. And of course, not the big players should be always highlighted, but also engaging the MSME industry in e-commerce post the Ldc graduation is also very important. We can look at the success story of Alibaba. Alibaba actually has majority, I think 84% of the vendors there are actually micro, small and medium entrepreneurs. So we need to train our CMSMEs to be engaged in e-commerce platforms so they get their access to the market is much widened. And of course, you mentioned the LDC committee, the high-powered committee. I'm very thankful to the Honorable Prime Minister that I'm a member of the committee, and there is 6 subcommittees which are working on each and every point that you mentioned, including trade negotiations, financing negotiations, intellectual property rights. There is 17 ministries, along with the FBCCI, Dhaka Chamber, and the BGMEA from the private sector, who are a part of this committee headed by the Prime Minister's office. They are all individually addressing these problems, but of course, the show must go on. And of course, we have also made a special proposal for the LDC, because these countries that are graduating in 2026, we wanted to create a separate basket and call them the COVID graduates. Because as we are battling the LDC challenges, at the same time, we are the only few countries, I think 5 or 6 countries right now, who are also battling COVID at the same time. So we should get a special preference to have extension of our facilities, because while we are going to graduate in 2026, we may be just about graduate from the COVID repercussions. So we would need some extension on various initiatives which we have demanded until 2030, and various sectors, of course, when it comes to export diversification. And of course, I must also inform all of you that Dhaka Chamber has been assigned to do some research and studies on behalf of the Prime Minister's office through the LDC committee to do various dialogues, seminars, discussions, as well as studies. To 2 of the studies which we have already highlighted with you during the presentation. And of course, there are more pending, and one actually pending approval from the Prime Minister's office, which we will also launch through the press very soon. But thank you very much, Dr. Nazin Ahmed, for your kind words. And let me also acknowledge the presence of my former president, Mr. Rashid Maksud Khan, who is here today. And interestingly, our president of 1998, just when the Honorable Governor of Bangladesh Bank, Dr. Farashuddin Ahmed, took office around the same time. So the DCCI president from Dr. Farash's regime is also present here with us today. Thank you, sir, for joining us despite your busy schedule. At this point of time, I would like to bring in a well-known economist who specializes in social sciences and humanities, amongst many others. Dr. Binayak Sen, he's also one of the panel economists for the 6th and the 7th 5-year plan of Bangladesh, and also contributed to other perspective plans. I would like to humbly know from Dr. Sen what policy we can follow to alleviate the new poverty, the informal sector crisis due to the pandemic, and streamlining the informal sectors to Bangladesh economy. And of course, you can touch upon the rest of the presentation at your disposal. Dr. Binayak Sen, over to you, sir.
Thank you. I like the presentation, and I want to make a few remarks on the issue which you have highlighted, and also on some of the issues which I have taken note of. First of all, on the issue of poverty, we must admit that there is no up-to-date poverty, employment, or human development data in this country. The latest poverty which we have is for 2016 HIS. Employment is for 2016-17 labor force survey, and human development data which we have for mixed 2018. So this affects the quality of policy making and quality of our discussion on this particular subject. And this needs to be corrected because we are celebrating this year 50 years of our independence, and we need a more up-to-date data and systematic data and coordinated data. Second point I want to make that if you consult World Development Indicators, it gives the poverty estimate by $1.90 line, which is the earlier dollar a day line. And by that category, we have lower poverty than in India. We have 14.3% below $1 international poverty line in 2016. And India had 22.5%. But what I want to emphasize that if you use the second upper poverty line, international poverty line, which is $3.20 line, used in Latin American countries, but also used in world comparisons, we find that our poverty rate goes up to 52% for the same year in 2016. So by $1.90 line, we are 14% only, but by $3.20, we are 52% poverty. So this difference between the two poverty lines gives you the indication of the size of vulnerable non-poor in our country. And that is what is affecting the current discourse on new poverty. Of course, not all of the new poor are structurally new poor. There is a segment of new poverty that is susceptible to oscillation depending on the cycle of lockdown or shutdown. As lockdown is removed, some of the new poor will go up the poverty ladder again, and they will become non-poor. We call them transient poor. Presently, we do not know the share of new poor versus transient poor. And that is also affecting the quality of our discussion and discourse. We need BBS to generate not only the new up-to-date data, but also to generate panel data, both in urban and rural areas, to give national estimates for new poverty and transient poverty, which is needed by the policymakers for social protection and other industrial incentives to be disbursed. Second epistemological problem is relating to the position of cottage small and medium enterprises, especially how to reach the informal cottage and small industries when we design a package for them. We do not know their location, they are not linked with NID, they are not under the banking system radar. So there is a whole lot to do to formalize them, to link them with the formal system in order to disburse speedy benefits to them. Third epistemological problem is how to design social protection system for the urban segment, because historically the social protection system has been developed for rural areas. Like rural primary health care is also historically developed in rural settings, but not in urban settings. So both urban social protection programs and urban primary health care programs needs to be revamped, especially in large cities, because the COVID concentration is largely in the large cities, at least during the first wave of corona. So we need to sort of repair these two systems. Third is that the problem of inequality in education that we observed during the pandemic months between rich and the poor, and how to address this problem. This is related to the quality of education as well. As you know, only a few countries of the world are part of the PISA system, which is Program for International Student Assessment. In our region, only 2 states of India, and that too very sporadically, participated in the PISA system. But if you look at the countries who are participating regularly in the PISA system, like China or Korea, or those set of countries, then you have an indication who are the upcoming sort of champions in the world of human capital. So we need to do a bit more on that. It is true that Bangladesh has been progressing for the last decade on 3 fronts. On agriculture, that to meet our food security, on manufacturing, because only a few developing countries, nations have performed well to become manufacturing nation. Bangladesh is one of the rare sort of species of them. And third, we perform well on social development. But we need to sort of address the next generation issues. I want to highlight that this structural transformation needs to continue further as the main driver of poverty reduction in our country. The question may come up that current sort of manufacturing GDP ratio is in the order of 18% in 2019. So 20% in 2019, and if you add the other sectors, then the weight of the industrial sector in total value added would be around 30%. But there is a limit to up to which it can be increased. Say for China, the share of manufacturing in the total value added is 27% in 2020. So this is the maximum you can go in increasing. So we have room to grow, another 7 percentage points we can increase. But what is more sort of interesting to see that as countries grow, their service sector reliance also grows. And it is important that we do not forget the importance of service sector, especially for absorbing the skilled labor force, youth labor force of the country. Service sector GDP, which is around 54% in 2020, can go up to 61% easily. So we need to sort of harness the potential of the service sector. Second is that all the social protection programs that we mentioned and all the structural transformation that we need for the country need some financing. And especially in the out of Ldc context, domestic taxes become an important consideration. We need to sort of prepare ourselves better. You mentioned that we are preparing. We have started preparing for that, but that needs to be geared up, because we have to rationalize our taxes, we have to rationalize our tariffs, and we need to look at all the hidden subsidies that will come under scrutiny. So we have only 5 years left for this, and this is a big challenge and a big transition. It's not like that we had once MFA restrictions and MFA withdrawal did not affect our export performance, or we have had Rana Plaza tragedy and it didn't so much affect our export performance. After all, the compliance challenges we have met, these are all true statements. But this cannot be assumed away when we are preparing for Ldc out of graduation. So this is the big issue, and this is I just flagged this issue. We need to encourage decentralized budget and decentralized resource mobilization, because it's a big country, 7th largest country in the world, and it's still have an unitary system of budget making and tax collection. So in Nepal, 50% of their budgets are decentralized. And in Kerala, Indian state of Kerala, 1/3 of their state budget is decentralized. So at least we should make a beginning in that connection, and that will also help us to raise the domestic tax GDP ratio. And the point cannot be overemphasized. Nepal has about 18-20% tax GDP ratio now, and I just had a discussion the last week with the former finance secretary of Nepal on the out of Ldc graduation issue, and he confirmed that Nepal is well poised for 24% tax GDP ratio in the next 2-3 years. So this is how the countries are preparing themselves for the same sort of year of graduation as we are. Nepal is also preparing, and we are still lagged behind a lot, and we are only 10% of GDP in terms of tax GDP ratio. There is a need for monitoring debt default in the banking system, no doubt about it. 25% non-performing banking assets, and the share might be rising, and I don't know which authority is monitoring closely that share and really assessing the implications of that for the rest of the economy. So last point is that we need to sort of utilize the pandemic crisis context to leverage institutional reforms to repair the sort of bottlenecks, whether it is in reaching out to the new poor, whether it is to reaching out to the cottage industries, small informal industries, to urban social protection, to urban healthcare, to have a revamped public health system in the country as a whole. We have a public health budget of 0.5% of GDP. 8 5-year plan suggests that it needs to be increased to 2.5% of GDP by the terminal year. And so we have a long way to go. And we have to prepare better for out of Ldc graduation. And for that, we need a range of economic reforms and studies and impact evaluation. There is also problems of governance in other spheres, but I will stop at this point because I know that Dr. Farashuddin is there and others are there who can shed light on important matters. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Binayakan. You have actually helped us a lot. We can actually complete many of our studies, which you have also addressed the issues of the systematic and the coordinated data for poverty, which is something that needs to be addressed. If you need to create policies, we need to have the access to the data, and the social protection system needs to be developed in the urban areas alongside the rural areas, which is something we have been still following the age-old method. So in order to move forward, we need to concentrate on the urban poverty as well. And of course, the backbone of the economy, the inequality in education when it comes to the rural and the urban, that needs to be addressed. And of course, that needs another dialogue of its own to be discussed on how to move forward. But thank you for your kind suggestions, and thank you for being with us today, despite your busy schedule. At this point of time, let me allow me to bring in a contemporary economist who not only worked as a veteran for international trade and tariff reforms, as well as the WTO negotiations for Bangladesh. Dr. Zaidi Sattar is a renowned policy advisor for trade, industry, and macroeconomic related issues. He's also the chairman of the Policy Research Institute. What I would like to know from Dr. Sattar is, what policy measures may we take to reform our trade regime for international trade that leads to economic growth in the years to come? And of course, you can touch on the rest of the presentation that was made for you earlier. Thank you for being with us here, sir. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, President of the Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industries, Mr. Rizwan Rahman, for inviting me to share my insights and my understanding of the state of the economy of Bangladesh as it stands today. I've listened to your presentation. It's so very comprehensive. The subject matter could have taken more than 3 sessions, not just one. So thank you for sharing a lot of these policy insights and recommendations, some of which are very practical, quite honestly. Some things that we wouldn't think about, but you, the private sector, you know where the shoe pinches. So you can devise these and talk about these practical policies. Thank you so much. May I, if you allow me to think a bit out of the box, I'm attracted by this particular expression called private sector perspectives. And I'd like to share my own view, a humble view of this. Bangladesh's economic progress has really been the outcome of a tripartite partnership between the private sector, which is you, the public sector, the government, which is our planning minister, Mr. Mohammad, Dr. Farashuddin, the mixed, the public sector as well as the non-government sector. So the tripartite partnership with the private sector, the public sector, and the non-government sector, which includes us. But there's one group that seems to be missed out when we talk about private sector perspectives. The private sector stands on 2 legs. The perspective that we often see, and that the one that you people express, seems to be that of producers, entrepreneurs, and investors. But the private sector stands on 2 legs. You've talked about this one leg. The other leg is the entire community of consumers. Private sector that you talk about, the producers, the investors, the entrepreneurs, cannot stand on their own leg. They have to rely on consumer demand, consumer spending. And that is critical, that the fact that the private sector progresses on these 2 legs. So when you bring in perspectives of the private sector, consumers are part of the private sector, actually, 165 million people. You need to give a perspective from the consumer's point of view. And the reason I say that is sometimes there is a conflict between the interests of consumers and producers. And it is up to the government and policymakers to strike a balance between the interests of consumers and producers. So in my humble view, I think when you talk of private sector perspective, it would be nice to include consumers in that perspective and what consumers want in terms of their future development, etc. Having said that, let me jump into the subject matter of today, the state of the Bangladeshi economy. And I'm an avid reader of media reports inside Bangladesh as well as outside Bangladesh. And it seems to me that, when I read reports of international analysts, reports from the Wall Street Journal, the BBC, and New York Times, and you name it, Bangladesh economy looks much better from outside than it looks from inside. The economy has come a long way. It is no longer the economy of the 1970s when it was, everybody talked about Bangladesh in terms of poverty, cyclones, floods, and so on and so forth. no longer, now they talk about Bangladesh as a model of development, as having made extraordinary progress, poverty. In fact, a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist recently, suggested to President Biden that you should look at Bangladesh on how to solve the poverty problem. So things like that. So Bangladesh is in a different category of a developing economy compared to what it was 50 years ago. So we need to take that into account. But at the same time, we do acknowledge that the glass is half full. We do have a long way to go. We have, the agenda remains unfinished. We need to work on that part of the agenda as well. And there's a lot of challenges, and Ldc graduation is only one of them. Now, let me acknowledge, if Bangladesh has come this far, has made economic progress and social progress, it's due to three pillars. There are three pillars of this progress. Number one is macroeconomic stability. We seldom talk about, the way we have done, the way we have managed our macroeconomic balances for the last 25 plus years. We have generated a sustainable and stable macroeconomic situation, so much so that 2 years of this COVID pandemic has not destroyed us, has not devastated the economy. We did bend, but we did not break. That is critical because, and that has been the hallmark of our economic policy: macroeconomic stability, prudent macroeconomic management, prudent fiscal deficits that has led to lower public debt. Public debt is among the lowest for a developing economy like Bangladesh. Our public debt is under 40% of GDP. Our external debt is only 13.5% of GDP, and our debt servicing ratio is so low, it's only about 3.5% of our foreign exchange earnings. I mean, these are strengths on which the Bangladesh economy can grow. And this foundation of sustainable macroeconomic stability has provided the room for rapid economic growth. We have seen our growth rising by 1% point average every 10 years, from the 1990s, the first 10 years of the 21st century. In the second 10 years of this 21st century, average GDP growth has been rising 1% by every 5 years, not just 10 years. So despite this knock that we have had from COVID for this 2 years, and GDP growth has to be revised downward. 3.5% growth in 2020 is fine. The economy did not shrink. Many developing economies shrunk. Many developed economies shrunk. Most developed economies actually shrunk. Bangladesh economy did not shrink. Growth has continued, but low. 5.5% growth for 2021 is a decent growth rate for a developing economy. So nothing to be, and I think the revival, as you talk about, survive and revive, revival is going pretty strong, and there are positive factors. Developed economies on which we rely on our exports, they are growing very strong, and therefore, I think 2022 will be a promising year, and the target growth of 7% is quite reasonable, and I think feasible. So this pillar, macro. The second pillar, of course, is our export performance. Starting from the 1990s, when we changed gear, we changed the direction of our policy, and you did ask me to focus on policy. We moved from a inward-looking, import substituting policy to an outward-looking, export-oriented, export-led growth policy with flexible exchange rates and open economies. In fact, in the 1990s or after the 1990s, Bangladesh economy was described as a globalizer, one of the 10 globalizers among developing economies. And Bangladesh has done, I think, changed direction in the right way, and we have benefited. It has given us rich dividends for the last 25 years, and that is where we have come. Not only we've had rapid growth, acceleration, we had stable growth as well. That is another point that people ignore. We didn't have fluctuating growth rates in the last 25 years. Growth has been increasing, but it has always been stable. So that is something very remarkable. Few economies have that. Yes, we've made social progress, and it's up. Dr. Binayak has, he's the expert on this particular subject, and he knows where we have done well and where we still fall short. Now, let me get to the point that I'm most conversant with, I think, that you mentioned it. Trade development, Bangladesh's trade developments. Yes, I think the first news that you have is Vietnam just overtook Bangladesh as #2 exporter of ready-made garments. This is just a transient event. The fact is that Bangladesh exports declined 17% in 2020. Vietnam's export did not decline. Vietnam's export increased 6.5% in 2020. And in that case, our garment exports, which was $34 billion in 2019, fell to $28 billion, and Vietnam's exports just exceeded 28 into 29. But Bangladesh exports are growing, including garment exports. We already registered 15% export growth in fiscal year 2021. And I expect that calendar year 2021 will have garment exports higher than garment exports of Vietnam, which, by the way, is a close third in the world of garment exports. Now, the reason for Vietnam's potential being greater, Vietnam is not just limited to garment export. They have a diversified export basket. And the reason why Vietnam is an export powerhouse, two reasons. One, Vietnam has an open door for FDI. Vietnam's manufacturing exports, 90% of manufacturing exports are driven by foreign enterprises, foreign invested enterprises, not local manufacturers. The second thing Vietnam has done is they've gone all the way to sign free trade agreements, regional free trade agreements, plurilateral free trade agreements, and bilateral free trade agreements, right, left, and center. So much so that by now, half of the world's economy, Vietnam has free trade access, meaning with 0 to 5% tariff rates to roughly half the world's economy. So they have the market, they're not an LDC, but they have, just like Bangladesh's LDC privilege, they have this market access across the world. By the way, that brings us to Bangladesh's policy regime, the trade policy regime. Is it helping exports? Now, I will have to say that yes, there is a good part of Bangladesh's trade policy, and there is a not so good part of Bangladesh's trade policy. The good part of Bangladesh's trade policy so there's a dualism in Bangladesh's trade policy. And what is it? The one policy that is geared to the ready-made garment sector is 99% correct. This is the right policy for a labor-intensive product, comparative advantage in the labor-intensive product like apparel making. Bangladesh has just done just the right thing, and it is that is the reason why we have an superior export performance, but limited to the ready-made garment sector and export. When it comes to the non-garment sector, we have 1,400 items, 6-digit items of exports, which are non-garment exports. There are policy, and your presentation also pointed out, you need to have a similar policy as you have for the ready-made garments in order to succeed like ready-made garments. And we're not succeeding like ready-made garments because in the non-garment sector, we're not getting the duty-free advantage of bonded warehouse facilities. But that's not the only reason. We have given very high tariff protection to the domestic, the non-garment export industries, which also produce in the domestic market. Now, this tariff protection, you think you give subsidies only to export? No, these tariff protection are subsidies to the import substituting sector, the non-garment sector. And these subsidies, who paid these subsidies? It's the consumers who are paying these subsidies. Imagine 100% tariff protection for biscuit industry. Where is it an infant industry? Is biscuit an infant industry? We are producing biscuits for 50 years. Why do you have to have 100% duty to protect? It's not for revenue. I can tell you that. So now, if producers find the domestic market more profitable because of the high tariff protection, then when they export market, there's no protection in export market. So if that kind of incentive or mal-incentives remains, then we cannot have export diversification, because the incentive will be to sell in the domestic market, and the domestic market is not sufficient. The scale economies tell you that the domestic economy is not large enough to give you 7-8% sustainable growth over the next few years, which you need, which is targeted in the 8th five-year plan. In order to have the 7-8% growth that is targeted in the 8th five-year plan, in order for Bangladesh to become a higher middle income country in 2031, you need to get GDP growth of 8%, 9%, 10%. Now, the Growth Commission that was set up in 2005 by the UN and the World Bank, headed by Nobel laureate Michael Spence, that Growth Commission asked one question: why is it that some developing countries are growing at 8, 9, 10%, like China, like Korea, Taiwan, and all that? And the answer was because these countries leveraged the world economy rather than the domestic economy. These countries looked outward rather than inward. And countries that look inward do not get 7, 8%, 9% GDP growth. Only countries that rely or leverage the world market do attain sustainable long-term growth of 7, 8, 9, 10%. And it's possible, they said. So we have a problem there. In order to get to that point, we need to rationalize our tariff structure. Our current tariff structure is just not made up for achieving sustainable 8% or plus growth. So there's an absolute imperative to rationalize our tariff structure, to make exports as profitable compared to the domestic market. That particular comparison has to be done through incentive policies. Right now, the incentive is adverse. The incentive is in favor of the domestic market, sales in the domestic market, rather than the export. So I think this is the fundamental point that I wanted to make. If the trade regime, this is part of the trade regime, trade policy, and that is something that needs some radical adjustment. We have done well on one part, we are not doing as well on the other part. So we can take lessons from the success part and translate it to the other part. And that is what we should be doing in the next 5 years and more. And thank you very much. I really appreciate this opportunity to share my views.
Thank
Dr.
you,
Farashuddin has
Dr.
raised.
Farashuddin wants to have an intervention. Sir, please.
Excellent. I would love to. Yeah. We go back, we did the same research,
Can you remove the unmuting privileges? IT, can you please remove the unmuting privileges?
Yes, I've done.
Sir, you can try again. If you click now. Yes, sir, it's working now.
Mr. Chairman, I was wondering how can I have my 10 minutes? I've been doing this seminar for a long time now. I have
Yes.
so many other things to do. So
Yes.
can I have my 10 minutes now?
It is right now where you make the closing remarks, sir. It is right now. So, of course, I'm going to, before I invite you to the floor, I once again want to humbly apologize for the miscommunication
Doesn't matter.
earlier.
Doesn't
But
matter.
again, one question to you, primarily one question to you. You have been an integral part of the first 5-year plan, followed by today you see the government's 8th 5-year plan. How has the journey been in the last 50 years? We want to hear from a bureaucrat to a central bank leader, and of course, being one of the close aides to the father of the nation, as you were his private secretary, which I proudly introduce you as the private secretary to Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. We would like to hear your views over the 50 years journey and eventually, finally, summarize on what you have heard from the speakers today, sir. And again, sir, I apologize for keeping you waiting for so long, sir.
Thank you very much. You are really very polite. You didn't have to apologize. These things happen. I'm very glad to be in this discussion with so many very dear learned people in front of me and participating, some of them my students. But I must start by paying tributes to the father of the nation. The month of the morning is here. The day of the morning is approaching. And in Bangladesh, if somebody could kill an angelic, a childlike person like Sheikh Mujib, they can, I think some people can do any crime. I'm sorry to say this. So I pay tribute to him, and I will start by referring to him. Despite what some of my most respected professors, Professor Nurul Islam and Professor Rahman Subhan, have stated categorically that Sheikh Mujib was of the socialist camp 100%. I absolutely deny this. In the debate in Awami League and in the cabinet, the debate whether there would be a space for private sector, Bangabandhu had always been a pragmatic. And he would always keep an opening that we should not drive away World Bank, we should have a space for them, we should have space for private sector. This public sector domination is an ad hoc arrangement because the private sector has fled to Pakistan. So he wanted to give a breathing space to the economy to have the private sector develop, and lo and behold, Bangladesh economy is now in the hands of the private sector. You may not believe this, but if you look around, if you look at the composition of the cabinet, if you look at the composition of the parliament, if you look at the deposits in the banks, it is now 70%. Ownership in the bank, 70%. So I think it's all around, it's private sector. So if you are looking for, and which is a good thing, I am a bureaucrat turned kind of a student of economics again, and I must say that my earlier views, my student days views, left-leaning views, public sector domination views have since been drastically modified in favor of providing the space for the private sector, which can deliver. But is private sector delivering in Bangladesh? That is a question I think I'll ask DCCI and all the stalwarts of the private sector. My students, Zaidi Sattar, Nazin, and all the others have stated very good things. But do we know, have we noted that BBS has just published the GDP growth rate figure of the year 2019 and 20. It has been confirmed to have been 3.51, not the 8% that we, well, yes, COVID has affected us. We have surpassed Pakistan and India in terms of per capita GNI. Okay, but the 2021 is now put at a 5.26 or something. I hope this will be realized, but I remain very skeptical because we talk about the investable fund or the foreign trade as an engine of growth, exports as an engine of growth. And I know my student Zaidi Sattar will do anything to discourage import substitution. I know all these are taken. But we should ask a question, how come a country like Nepal can have a tax GDP ratio of 18% and will have 24% in the next 5 years? And we are 10% and the trend is downward. It does not glorify any one of us, certainly not the private sector. Because if you look at the composition of the bank deposits, the number of Kotipati bank depositors, which is not, it's not a bad thing to have more Kotipati, it's a good thing. So it has increased by 11,600 in the last 1 year. And the share in the deposit of the banks in 43,000 accounts, it is 47%. So 47% of the bank deposits belong to 43,000 bank accounts only. So I mean, in Bangabandhu's dream of Sonar Bangla, he wanted private sector, but he never, and I emphasize, never wanted the kind of concentration of economic power we are willfully allowing and doing, and we are not in dialogue with the private sector as to how to reform the economy, as to how to, well, Boston Consulting Group and MasterCard in 2016, they said Bangladesh is the most fertile ground for production of highly visible consumption goods because 25 million people have per capita income of $5,000 and more. So how come of these 25 million people, only 2.5 million people pay taxes? Can you blame the government for this? Can you blame the public sector for this? So let us, or if Binayak said during the COVID, there has been people added to the rank of the poor, but the power that be in the government says, I don't believe that there has been any increase in the number of poor in Bangladesh. What do you do? I mean, how do you go? These are all possibly very unpleasant to the ears of the audience here. But the reason I say this is, let us very carefully do our soul searching our heart. Maybe some of you don't know that Vietnam has just surpassed Bangladesh in terms of exports of RMG, and it is going up, and our RMG export is not growing, it is going down. Actually, Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam are the places where RMG growth is taking place. Vietnam is a small country. I mean, not in international trade, but in terms of population compared to us. But look at its export. So let us take lessons from Vietnam and Nepal, and also from Sri Lanka, which has made a mess of itself, and try to sit down together under the umbrella of the private sector, because that's the dominant force in Bangladesh, and find out how do we reform? How do we encourage these 25 million people with taxable income to pay taxes to help themselves and the country? I am very afraid that the way the country is going, its exports, its growth may not be sustainable unless we can, because how long the public sector with 24% credit growth sustain this? It's not possible. It's not desirable either. So we'll have to convince the private sector somehow or other to discharge its responsibility. And how do we do this? One simple. How come in the stimulus package, which very gutsily, very courageously announced by the Prime Minister, only the upper end credit is moving, not the credit for the micro, for the cottage, micro, and small? How can the budget lumps medium and small together? All of us here, even if we don't like me, would know that if we put medium and small together, medium will eat up the share of this small. This is what is happening. So if we could have a mechanism for the credit to flow to micro, cottage, micro, and small, if necessary, creating a venture capital, if necessary, putting only a nominal interest rate, that will create the jobs, that will remove the poverty, that will remove the disparity. But most importantly for the private sector, that will create purchasing power. And that is the lifeline of a, let us say, a pragmatic economy Sheikh Mujib wanted. Sheikh Mujib wanted a private sector economy like Stiglitz. Of course, he did not study Stiglitz, but the principles are the same. So we should have a continued private sector domination under a regulatory framework so that the private sector makes its contribution to the mobilization of revenue for investment, for discharging its duty of paying the taxes, of reviving the cottage, micro, and small enterprises so that the economy can, I'm very afraid that the economy, the jump of the economy started in 2009, January, may not continue much more unless we do the kadua, do the bitter reform and have a private-public dialogue dominated by private sector, formally, informally, and responsibility. I'm sorry for sounding bitter, but I'm like this. I speak out my mind. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Again, once again, I would repeatedly apologize for the disruption created in communicating with you today. If you allow me just 2 minutes to wrap up, I will just go back to what Dr. Sattar said today. Among many of you, I am one of the few today who is a...
Sorry, can I take 1 more minute?
Sure.
We must make all efforts to attract FDI with buyback guarantees. We must try to transform the success of Bangladesh, that is the agriculture sector, in producing goods and services more for the domestic market. Because if you can create the purchasing power, the domestic economy. So these things I wanted to mention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We are fully aware of the compassion the father of the nation had towards the farmers and the agricultural sector. I personally have seen many videos of his interviews and his addresses, which is highlighted. So as I was saying, sir, among very few here today, I am a first-generation Bangladeshi. So, as in born post-71. So, and many of you have seen the whole transformation of this East Pakistan to Bangladesh and where Bangladesh is today. So as I was saying, when Dr. Sattar mentioned poverty, cyclone, and whenever I used to go to college or when I studied abroad, they said, oh, Bangladesh, oh, so poor, so poor. That is the impression we had of that Bangladesh, even 20 years ago. It is all about cyclones. It is all about being poor. And however, today, Bangladesh's success story, I don't want to say any further because Dr. Sattar has clearly highlighted. And so please remind me, next time I speak in the international arena, I need to have my speech vetted by you. So there is a lot of data that you have shared over the past years. And another thing you mentioned about the FDI export basket and the Vietnam success story, which we need to highlight. But I would also like to say that Vietnam has been a success story primarily driven by a specific country of interest. Whereas I would like to proudly say that Bangladesh is fully homegrown. You know, the domestic market, the private sector, as Dr. Farash rightly said, you know, it is fully homegrown. So we take pride in that. And of course, now Bangladesh is ready to expose itself as the destination for tomorrow. And the government is taking various opportunities. Recently, expos and the rise of the Bengal Tiger delegation that went to the United States recently. They are obviously, it is a never-ending battle. We will keep trying. And of course, you rightly said, the RNG success story needs to be applied to all those other sectors that have the potential. You said the biscuit factories, you know, we have been producing it for so many years. Why aren't we giving the same incentives? Maybe these are all those sectors. One day, inshallah, we'll be able to give us $50 billion to the national exchequer in the near future. We have identified a few export sectors in that. Now, coming to our guest of honor, our very dear Dr. Mohammad Farashuddin. Sir, you commented on something about Bangabandhu having a socialist view. So I personally have not seen him. I have studied about him. I have read about him. So those of us who knows about the 6-point movement can automatically assume he did not have a socialist view. It was for the economic freedom of East Pakistan. That is what he fought for. And 3 of them were directly associated with the independence and the success of the private sector. So therefore, whoever thinks that he is a socialist view has not done their homework right. So we need to reassure, even if a younger generation like me can understand that, and I don't say it from a political perspective, I do not, I say it from a complete business perspective. I come from a business family with no history of politics. So I'm clearly saying that from a business point of view, he wanted economic independence for East Pakistan. When that was failed, we moved on to the independence. That is what I have learned so far. You have mentioned, sir, about the presence of the money deposits in 70% in private banks. It is, sir, you'll be pleased to know it is almost 80% now in the private sector banks and 20% in the public banks. And you talk about the economic independence. Who gave us telecom? Who gave us television? Who gave us banks? All private infrastructure. Who gave us airlines? We never thought about this. Even 20 years ago, let alone 50 years, we never thought the government will be so pro-private sector. And sorry, sir, because again, I want to apologize because you missed my presentation. We did include the very recent BBS study on the economic growth changes, as well as the surpassing of Vietnam in the garments arena. And I will again resend the presentation to you for your information. And as for the Sri Lanka success story, we must also take pride that Bangladesh is now a country who's providing donations and loans to Sri Lanka right now. And I also remember when I was in college, this same government provided a $1 million grant to save the Hurricane Katrina affected people in the United States. And that was something I was sharing with my friends abroad, that Bangladesh is now giving grants to the United States. And then private sector domination, the Prime Minister herself said that 81% of it will be achieved by the private sector in the 8th five-year plan, which already goes to show that the government is also acknowledging the importance of the private sector. Again, I thank all of you distinguished speakers for making our work so much easier with your valued remarks. And at this point of time, I would like to conclude my moderation and request my colleague, Mr. N.K. Muman, whom I also must acknowledge has joined us from Toronto at this odd, ungodly hour and has been there throughout the whole event. And I would like him to deliver his concluding remarks. Over to you, Muman Bhai. Thank you. Please unmute. Yes, you're audible now.
Yes, fine. Thank you, President. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. On behalf of Dhaka Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I would like to take the privilege to extend my special gratitude to all respected participants for their kind participation. My wholehearted thanks and gratitude goes to the Honorable Chief Guest, Mr. M. A. Mannan, MP, Honorable Minister, Ministry of Planning, Government of the People's Republic of Bangladesh for his kind presence. His holistic argument and illustrations about the macroeconomy have surely enlightened the audience and the participants. I fervently express my thanks to the chief guest, to the guest of honor, Dr. Mohammad Farashuddin, Chief Advisor, East West University and former Governor Bangladesh Bank, for his valued suggestions and remarks regarding overall economic growth and sustainability of the country. I would like to express my special thanks to the special discussions, Dr. Binayak Sen, Director General, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies, Dr. Jaidi Sattar, Policy Research Institute, PRI of Bangladesh, Professor Muhammad Abdul Momin, Director, Institute of Business Administration, University of Dhaka, and Dr. Nazin Ahmed, Country Economist of UNDP Bangladesh, for their valued contributions to the discussions held today. I'm sure that their remarks, suggestions, and guidelines will be instrumental for all the stakeholders of the economy in setting, implementing, and utilizing monetary and fiscal policy initiatives for survival, revival, and growth of real as well as financial sectors of the country. Ladies and gentlemen, despite the pandemic-induced uncertainty, Bangladesh's economy has shown nascent signs of recovery, backed by a rebound in exports and high remittance inflows, despite a large shortfall in revenue mobilization, disruption in the pace of the implementation of public investment projects, escalation of budget deficit and external borrowing, slowdown of private sector credit growth, and sharp fall in trade. Hence, we have to emphasize on business-friendly regulatory supports for expanding local businesses, especially the same SME segment, and investments for establishing successful businesses and industries as a role model for attracting foreign direct investment. Trade diplomacy, along with the participations and utilizations of regional economic or trade blocks, needs to be strengthened for ensuring export diversification and domestic market development, for ensuring that the economy starts moving again from its existing stagnant situation, the need for which has been very correctly stressed by the discussions. Distinguished guests, the recommendations and suggestions retrieved from this discussion will be forwarded to the respective government and relevant authorities to address the crucial issues of macroeconomy. In fact, it is particularly easier for us since the Honorable Planning Minister is already here. I once again thank him for being present here and listening to the stakeholders personally. Before concluding, I would also like to thank all the special discussions once again and all the distinguished guests and participants for their patience hearing, participation, and discussions in this webinar. Allah Hafiz. Back to President.
Thank you. Thank you, Momin Bhai. Dr. Sattar, thank you very much. Nazinapa, thank you. Dr. Binaksan. Ji.
Can I make just a small point? It's
Please,
a second of the program. I don't want that people should get a wrong impression about Bangabandhu's philosophy. As he was not a state socialist, and he certainly was not a kind of control socialist, but he pursued the idea of social justice. When we discount the concept of socialism, we should not discount the concept of social justice, of equity. He has written, he has spoken several times during the debate on Constitution in 1972 Parliament, and before, during the East Pakistan days, about the need for social equity. The 6-point program and the 21-point program of United Front all emphasize the issue of social equity. Samotabadi Samajer Akankha was very much at the heart of Bangabandhu. So we should be very careful about how we interpret his position on this question. Thank you.
That misinterpretation was what the people were trying to highlight, because socialist and social justice is two different things. So of course we should not confuse. Thank you for clarifying that. It is much clearer. You explained better. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Zaidi Satta. Sir, thank you. We have kept you occupied here for a very long time. Thank you for joining us. Nazina Pai again. And of course, all the other viewers, my sincere apologies for not being able to give you the floor despite the time constraint. And of course, I can see Siddiqui Bhai, my colleagues from the board and our conveners, and of course, our honorable former president, Mr. Rashid Maksud Khan, who has been here 2.5 hours now. Sir, thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sound good.
Thank you.
Your how are against